we said it was going to happen today, and it did happen today. Breaking news out of Portland. The Ninth Circuit, breaking news about Portland, I should say. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has overturned Judge Immergut's order blocking the federalization of the National Guard, which means President Trump can. Am I right? Big deal?
It is a big deal. And I want to just correct one thing and then explain why functionally it is the same. This is a stay of Judge Immergut's opinion. And then just from a little bit of the beginning of this 93-page opinion, it says, after considering the record, and by the record, they mean all the factual evidence at this preliminary stage.
All right, let's talk about what just happened because this is massive. The Supreme Court just made a ruling that seriously cuts into Trump's power as president. In a shocking 7-2 decision that came out late at night, the court threw out several of Trump's biggest and broadest uses of executive power, saying they were unconstitutional and crossed the line between the branches of government. Experts are calling this a constitutional nuclear strike. The court's opinion, which had no single author's name attached to it, wiped out Trump's orders that gave him sole, unchecked control over independent government agencies and state National Guard units. On top of that, the decision immediately put a freeze on dozens of White House orders, and sources inside the government say this has caused a complete breakdown in normal operations across several federal departments. This is the strongest the courts have ever pushed back against a sitting president in more than 50 years. And here's what makes it even more striking. This decision came from the very same Supreme Court that includes 3 justices Trump personally picked himself. Let me walk you through exactly what happened here, because while it's a lot to take in, it really matters. Throughout his time in office, Trump has been signing executive orders that dramatically expand how much power the president holds. He claimed full control over independent government agencies that are specifically designed to operate without political interference.
And this matter is tried, and it gets back to an appellate court through an ordinary process where they have full briefing and full evidence that they still think Donald Trump is likely to prevail there because he has the discretion to determine as the president.
He also said he had the right to send state National Guard troops to handle law enforcement inside the country, even without the permission of the states those troops belong to. On top of that, he tried to take control over the federal budget and over who gets hired and fired in the federal government powers that are supposed to belong to Congress, not the president. In simple terms, Trump has been pushing to make the presidency an office with almost no limits on its power, and the Supreme Court just shut that down as firmly and clearly as possible. According to Reuters and NPR, the justices ruled that Trump's orders, the ones that handed himself complete control over independent agencies and military deployments, were unconstitutional. They went too far. And it's worth pointing out that the word total authority wasn't something critics made up. That was Trump's own language, written directly into his executive orders. He actually used the words total authority. And the Supreme Court, in a 7-2 decision, came back and said that's simply not how the Constitution works. Presidents do not have total authority. Their powers are limited, clearly spelled out in the Constitution, and kept in check by both Congress and the courts. The court's emergency order also specifically stops Trump from using state National Guard troops for law enforcement operations inside the country. This has been one of the biggest points of conflict. Trump had been trying to take National Guard units from different states and use them for immigration crackdowns, controlling protests, and other domestic operations. States like Oregon and Illinois went to court over this, arguing that Trump had no legal right to take command of their own military forces. Lower courts had already blocked some of these deployments, and now the Supreme Court has completely dismantled the entire legal framework Trump was using to justify that power grab. In her separate written opinion agreeing with the ruling, Justice Amy Coney Barrett stated that no president has the power to override Congress simply by issuing a decree. And let's be very clear about who Amy Coney Barrett is. She is a Trump appointee, someone Trump personally placed on the Supreme Court because he believed she would stand by conservative values. And she is now telling him directly that he cannot just sign orders that push aside the authority of Congress. And that's what makes this so significant, because it shows that even justices who share Trump's political and legal beliefs can see that what he has been doing has gone way too far, that his claims over presidential power are so extreme, so far outside normal boundaries, that they actually put the entire constitutional system at risk. Chief Justice Roberts went even further than that in his written opinion, warning that unchecked authority strikes at the very core of the republic itself. Think about that language for a moment, the very core of the republic. That is extraordinarily strong wording coming from the Chief Justice of the United States. He is not just saying Trump's actions are legally wrong. He is saying they are a direct threat to American democracy itself. That if these power grabs had been allowed to continue, they would have fundamentally changed what kind of government America is, moving it away from a system built on checks and balances, and pushing it towards something that looks much more like one-man rule. The real-world impact of this ruling is immediate, and it is serious. White House officials told the Washington Post that this decision effectively shuts down more than 30 executive orders. 30 orders. That includes Trump's directives on immigration enforcement, control over the federal budget, and the mass firing of federal workers. Every single one of those orders is now invalid. Federal agencies are being told they must go back to how things were operating before those orders were put in place within weeks. That means policies that have been running for months are now being reversed. Programs that were functioning under Trump's expanded authority have to come to a stop. The entire structure Trump built to exercise an unprecedented level of presidential power is now being torn down by order of the courts. Legal experts are describing this as the most powerful judicial check on a sitting president in more than 50 years. They are drawing comparisons to the United States versus Nixon case back in 1974, the landmark ruling that forced President Nixon to hand over the Watergate tapes, which ultimately led directly to his resignation. That was the Supreme Court telling a president, in no uncertain terms, that he is not above the law and does not have unlimited power to hide behind. This current ruling carries that same message. But experts say it may actually be even broader in scope because this isn't about one single scandal or one specific controversy. This is about the fundamental question of how much power a president is allowed to have, and the court is saying clearly and firmly that Trump has gone massively beyond those limits. The 7-2 vote itself tells you a great deal. This was not a narrow, split decision that fell along party lines. 7 justices, including conservatives and justices Trump himself appointed, all agreed that Trump crossed the line. Only 2 dissented. That tells you the legal problems with what Trump was doing were so obvious, so undeniable, that even justices who might normally lean in his favor could not bring themselves to defend it. When a president loses a case on executive power by a margin of 7-2, the court is sending the clearest possible message you have completely overstepped your authority. And privately, White House aides are admitting as much. Sources say they are acknowledging behind closed doors that this ruling has seriously crippled the administration's ability to function internally. They are calling it a constitutional ambush. That one phrase tells you everything about how blindsided they were. Trump and his team genuinely believed they could keep pushing the limits of presidential power further and further, and that the courts would simply allow it. But the Supreme Court just drew a hard line in the sand. And now Trump's entire way of governing, which was built entirely on taking unilateral action without needing approval from Congress or oversight from the courts, has been ruled unconstitutional. And this is happening at possibly the worst moment it could for Trump. He is already buried under a pile of problems: the trade disaster with Canada, the corruption investigations inside the Department of Justice, the perjury allegations against Kash Patel, the backlash over Adam Schiff's indictment, the illegal demolition carried out at the White House, Melania's lawsuit, and now, on top of all of that, the Supreme Court has stripped away many of the key tools he has been relying on to actually exercise power. He can no longer just sign executive orders and do whatever he wants. He is now required to operate within the boundaries the Constitution sets, and that is going to seriously limit what he is able to get done for the rest of his time in office. So let's get into why this ruling hits Trump as hard as it does. Here is what most people are not fully understanding about this Supreme Court decision, and I mean really not understanding. Everyone is focused on the immediate effects: the 30 executive orders being suspended, the National Guard deployments being stopped, the breakdown in government operations. And yes, all of that matters and all of it is dramatic. But the deeper meaning of this ruling is what it says about the boundaries of presidential power and how completely it rejects the entire way Trump has chosen to govern. Because Trump has been running his presidency on the belief that winning an election basically makes you an elected dictator, that once you are in the White House, you have almost unlimited power to do whatever you want. And the Supreme Court just told him, flat out, that he is completely wrong. That is not what the Constitution says. That is not how this government works. And that entire approach to running the country has now been declared unconstitutional. Let's look specifically at what Trump has been trying to do with executive power. Throughout his second term, he has been signing executive orders claiming authority that no president before him has ever claimed. He asserted control over independent agencies, organizations like the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Trade Commission, and the Securities and Exchange Commission. These agencies were specifically designed to operate at a distance from political influence, because their job is to regulate markets and protect everyday consumers. They are supposed to make decisions based on knowledge, expertise, and the law, not based on whatever the president wants for political reasons. But Trump signed orders declaring that these agencies answer directly to him, that he can overrule their decisions, and that he has total authority over everything they do. That is an enormous expansion of presidential power, because if the president controls all of the independent agencies, then they are no longer independent at all. They just become extensions of the White House, doing whatever the president tells them to do, which completely defeats the entire reason they exist. Trump also claimed the power to take control of state National Guard units and deploy them inside the country without asking the states for permission. The National Guard operates in a unique way. These units normally fall under the authority of each state, commanded by the state's governor. They can be brought under federal control, but only for specific, limited purposes, such as responding to a national emergency or supporting military missions overseas. There are very strict rules against using military forces to police the American public here at home. That restriction comes from the Commentators Act, a law passed after the Civil War, for one specific reason: to stop presidents from using the military as a domestic police force against their own citizens. Trump has been trying to get around those restrictions entirely. He has claimed the right to take over state National Guard units and use them for immigration enforcement, shutting down protests, and other operations happening right here on American soil. That is precisely what the Commentators Act was written to prevent, and that is exactly what the Supreme Court just put a stop to. The court ruled that Trump's claim of authority to deploy military forces domestically violates both the principles laid out in the Constitution and existing federal law. And the separation of powers issues at the heart of this case are as fundamental as it gets. The Constitution splits government power across three separate branches. Congress writes the laws, the president carries them out, the courts decide what they mean, and each branch is designed to keep the others in check so that no single branch ever becomes too powerful on its own. That entire system only functions if each branch stays within its own boundaries and respects the authority of the others. Trump has been consistently breaking that framework. He has claimed the power to simply ignore laws passed by Congress when he disagrees with them. He has done things that legally require congressional approval without ever getting that approval. He has defied court orders and ignored subpoenas from Congress. He has treated the other two branches of government not as equal partners, but as obstacles standing in his way. And the Supreme Court has now said, directly and clearly, that all of that is unconstitutional, that the president does not get to decide for himself how much power he holds. The Constitution makes that decision, and Trump has gone beyond what the Constitution permits. Justice Barrett's separate written opinion in this case carries particular weight precisely because she is a Trump appointee. She is a conservative justice who, in general, believes in strong executive authority, but even she looked at what Trump has been doing and concluded it had gone too far. Her statement that no president may override Congress simply by issuing a decree is a direct and pointed criticism of exactly how Trump has been governing, because that is literally what he has been doing. Congress passes laws that define how agencies are supposed to operate and what military actions are authorized, and then Trump signs executive orders that effectively throw those laws out, claiming his authority overrides them. Barrett is saying that is not allowed. Executive orders cannot cancel out laws passed by Congress. Presidents must work within the legal framework that Congress puts in place. That is a basic principle of how this government is supposed to work, but apparently it is something Trump needed to hear directly from the Supreme Court before it could sink in. Chief Justice Roberts' warning about unchecked authority threatening the very core of the republic is even more striking. Roberts is not the kind of judge who reaches for dramatic language or overblown statements. He is known for being careful, precise, and restrained in the way he writes. So when he uses words as strong as strikes at the marrow of the republic, he is not being theatrical. He is expressing real, genuine alarm. He is saying that what Trump has been doing is not simply a legal error that can be corrected. It is a direct threat to the survival of constitutional democracy in America. Because the moment a president can claim unlimited power and face no real consequences for it, we no longer have a republic. What we have at that point is a dictatorship. The fact that this came down as a 7-2 decision is remarkable in itself. On big constitutional questions, the Supreme Court almost always splits along ideological lines, conservatives on one side, liberals on the other. But not this time. 7 justices, coming from different ends of the political spectrum, all looked at what Trump was claiming and reached the same conclusion, that it was indefensible. The majority included all 3 liberal justices, Chief Justice Roberts, and Justices Barrett, Kavanaugh, and Gorsuch. 3 justices that Trump himself appointed all voted against him. That alone tells you just how extreme his claims of power actually were. We do not yet know from the reporting exactly who the 2 dissenters were, but the most likely candidates are Justices Thomas and Alito, who have historically been the most willing to support broad presidential authority. But even if that is the case, the fact that they could not pull a single third vote to their side shows that Trump's legal position was so far outside acceptable boundaries that even conservative justices who might personally want to rule in his favor simply could not justify doing so. The immediate real-world impact inside the administration is nothing short of chaos. White House officials are openly saying the ruling has crippled their ability to function internally. Federal agencies that have spent months operating under Trump's expanded executive orders are now scrambling to figure out what they are actually supposed to be doing. Are the old policies still valid? Do they go back to how things worked before Trump's orders took effect? Who exactly has the authority to make decisions now? The legal confusion is enormous, and it is hitting some of Trump's biggest priorities directly. Immigration enforcement, which has been running under expanded executive authority, may now have to be scaled back or completely restructured. The mass layoffs Trump ordered across the federal government are now in question. Agencies may no longer have the legal standing to fire employees the way Trump demanded. Budget decisions Trump made on his own, without congressional approval, may now be invalid. The entire government apparatus is being forced to stop and ask itself whether it still has the legal authority to keep doing what it has been doing. The comparison being drawn to United States versus Nixon is very fitting. That case established once and for all that presidents do not have unlimited executive privilege, that they cannot hide information from criminal investigations simply by claiming presidential authority. It was a historic moment that put a firm ceiling on presidential power, and Nixon had no choice but to accept it. It ultimately contributed directly to his downfall because the tapes that were released revealed his personal involvement in criminal obstruction of justice. This ruling carries that same historic weight. It draws clear, firm lines around what presidents are and are not allowed to do. They cannot claim unlimited control over independent agencies. They cannot take command of military forces and use them for domestic law enforcement without proper legal authorization. They cannot sign executive orders that effectively cancel out laws passed by Congress. These are not gray areas or matters of interpretation. They are bright, clear rules that will apply not just to Trump, but to every president who comes after him. The court is deliberately defining exactly where presidential power ends, specifically to make sure the presidency never becomes a dictatorship. The political fallout from this is also enormous. Trump was already drowning in multiple crises before this ruling came down, and now he has lost a major high-profile court battle that directly weakens his ability to govern the way he has been governing. He cannot simply sign executive orders to get around problems anymore. He has to actually work with Congress. He has to respect the independence of federal agencies. He has to follow the law. And the one thing Trump has made crystal clear throughout his presidency is that he is deeply uncomfortable operating within any kind of constraints. His instinct, every single time, is to bulldoze straight through anything standing in his way. But the Supreme Court has now placed something in his path that he absolutely cannot bulldoze through. And this is going to give real energy to Trump's opponents. Congressional Democrats are going to see this ruling as full vindication. The courts are finally holding Trump accountable for his abuses of power. And that is going to trigger a wave of more aggressive oversight, more investigations, and louder demands for accountability because the Supreme Court has essentially confirmed that the concerns about Trump overstepping his authority are legitimate and well-founded. That makes it much harder for Republicans to keep brushing those concerns off as nothing more than partisan attacks, and it is going to have a direct impact on the 2026 midterm elections. Voters are now going to go to the polls knowing that even a conservative-leaning Supreme Court concluded that Trump was violating the Constitution. That is a powerful thing to carry into an election. It sends a clear signal that worries about Trump's authoritarian behavior are not just Democratic talking points being pushed for political gain. They are real, documented constitutional violations that even the justices Trump personally placed on the court have been forced to acknowledge. And that could absolutely move moderate voters, people who may have been willing to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, to think twice. All right. Let's now break down what truly matters here, because this Supreme Court ruling is genuinely historic and the consequences of it are far-reaching. There are 4 core points worth understanding. Point number 1, this ruling completely rejects Trump's entire theory of presidential power and redraws the constitutional boundaries around what a president can and cannot do. Trump has been running his presidency on the belief that the president holds almost unlimited authority, that he can take whatever action he decides is necessary without needing approval from Congress and without being subject to oversight from the courts. That executive power has essentially no ceiling, as long as the president wraps his actions in the language of national security or executive privilege. The Supreme Court has now looked at that belief and said it is completely wrong. The Constitution does not create an all-powerful presidency. It creates a limited executive one that must operate within the boundaries Congress sets, and that can be held accountable by the courts. Presidents cannot claim total authority. They cannot cancel out laws passed by Congress. They cannot take command of military forces and deploy them domestically for law enforcement purposes without proper legal authorization. These are core, foundational principles of how the American system of government is supposed to work. And Trump has been breaking them, repeatedly and deliberately. By striking down Trump's executive orders in a 7-2 decision, a decision that included 3 justices, Trump himself appointed the court has delivered an unmistakable message. Presidential power has limits. Trump has exceeded those limits. And this is not a political ruling driven by partisan agendas. This is the judicial branch doing exactly the job it was created to do, keeping the executive branch in check. The fact that conservative justices joined the majority only reinforces that point. Trump's claims were so far outside the boundaries of acceptable presidential conduct that even justices who broadly favor strong executive authority could not bring themselves to defend what he was doing. Point number 2. This ruling has thrown the administration into immediate chaos, and it is going to seriously cripple Trump's ability to govern for the rest of his term. 30 executive orders suspended, immigration enforcement operations potentially forced to scale back, federal layoff directives potentially thrown out, budget authority taken away, National Guard deployments shut down. Every single one of these was a central tool Trump was relying on to push his agenda forward, and now they are gone. Trump is going to be forced to figure out how to govern like a normal president within the actual limits the Constitution sets. That means he has to go to Congress and work to get legislation passed instead of just signing orders. It means he has to respect the independence of regulatory agencies instead of trying to bring them all under his direct personal control. It means he has to follow the legal processes that exist for things like federal hiring and budget decisions, instead of trying to handle everything on his own terms. And the problem is that Trump has made it abundantly clear throughout his presidency that he is terrible at all of those things. He does not like negotiating with Congress. He does not respect institutions that operate independently of him. He does not want to follow processes that slow him down or limit what he can do. His entire way of operating has been to use executive power to go around normal rules and constraints, and the Supreme Court just took that ability away from him. So now he faces a simple choice. Either he fundamentally changes the way he operates, which seems extremely unlikely given everything we know about his personality, or he simply fails to get much of anything done for the rest of his time in office. Those are really the only two options left. The breakdown in government operations is also going to hit federal agencies hard and directly. Career government employees who have spent months carrying out Trump's executive orders now have no idea whether they are supposed to keep going or stop. Legal teams inside those agencies are scrambling to sort out what is still legally valid and what has now been thrown out. Programs are being put on hold while everyone waits for legal guidance on what to do next. This uncertainty is going to slow down government operations across the board, and while some of that might actually be a good thing if it puts a stop to harmful policies Trump was pushing, it is also going to disrupt completely normal, legitimate government functions that have absolutely nothing to do with Trump's overreach. Point number 3, this ruling is very likely to set off a wave of new legal challenges and congressional investigations. Because once the Supreme Court says a president exceeded his authority in specific areas, people are naturally going to start looking at everything else that president has done and asking the same question, did he exceed his authority there too? There are going to be more lawsuits challenging other executive orders, more cases asking whether Trump had any legal standing to take various actions in the first place, and courts going forward are going to be far more skeptical of broad claims of executive power because this ruling has given them a clear framework for pushing back. Congressional Democrats are also going to feel a surge of energy from this. They are going to point to this ruling as hard proof that their concerns about Trump violating the Constitution were not exaggerated or politically motivated. That is going to fuel more aggressive oversight, more subpoenas, more hearings, more demands for documents. They are going to dig into how Trump's executive orders were put together, whether lawyers inside the administration warned him that what he was doing was unconstitutional, and whether he went ahead and did it anyway with full knowledge that it was illegal. All of that is going to pile more political pressure onto an administration that is already struggling to keep its head above water with one scandal after another. And this is also going to ripple into Justice Department and FBI investigations. Legal analysts are predicting a wave of congressional investigations into the leadership of both Bondi's DOJ and Patel's FBI. Because if Trump's claims of executive power were illegitimate to begin with, serious questions arise about whether the investigations and prosecutions carried out under that authority were also illegitimate. Defense attorneys in cases like Adam Schiff's indictment are going to stand up in court and argue that those prosecutions were built on authority Trump never legally had, and that argument could seriously undermine a whole range of the political prosecutions Trump has been pursuing. Point number 4. This is a historic moment, and its impact on presidential power will be felt for generations. Legal scholars are already calling this the most significant check on presidential authority in 50 years. They are drawing direct comparisons to United States versus Nixon. That is the kind of ruling that gets studied in law schools and referenced in court cases for decades to come. It sets firm precedents, clear rules about what presidents can and cannot do that will not just constrain Trump, but will apply to every single president who follows him. And that actually matters enormously for the long-term health of American democracy, because Trump is not going to be president forever. Because eventually there will be other presidents, from both parties. And if Trump's sweeping claims of executive power had been allowed to stand, every future president could have pointed to that precedent and claimed the exact same authority for themselves. A Democratic president could have declared total control over independent agencies. A Democratic president could have deployed military forces inside the country for domestic purposes. That would have permanently and fundamentally shifted the balance of power in American government. By striking down Trump's claims, the Supreme Court is stopping that shift from happening. It is reaffirming that the presidency is still a limited office, defined and constrained by the Constitution. That the separation of powers still means something. That Congress and the courts can still push back against a president who goes too far. That is going to make it harder for any future president, regardless of which party they belong to slide toward authoritarian rule. And that is good for democracy, even if it is very bad for Trump's ability to push his agenda forward. So what happens from here? Trump is almost certainly going to go after the Supreme Court. He is going to call the decision wrong, claim it is politically driven, and attack the justices publicly. He may even hint at defying the ruling outright, though doing that would immediately trigger a full-blown constitutional crisis unlike anything this country has seen in modern times. White House lawyers are going to be working around the clock trying to figure out how to rescue whatever is left of Trump's agenda and make it fit within the new boundaries the court has drawn. Federal agencies are going to need clear guidance on what they are actually authorized to do going forward. Congress is going to open hearings to examine exactly what Trump was doing and how he ever convinced himself he had authority the Supreme Court says he never possessed. Democrats are going to take this ruling and use it as a political weapon straight through to the midterm elections. And Republicans are going to find themselves in a deeply uncomfortable position, trying to defend a president who just got rejected 7-2 by a court that includes 3 justices he personally chose and placed on the bench. So here is the bottom line. The Supreme Court has issued a landmark 7-2 ruling that strikes down Trump's claims of total authority over independent federal agencies and state National Guard units. The decision has invalidated more than 30 executive orders and thrown the administration into immediate chaos. 3 of Trump's own appointees joined the majority in ruling that Trump violated the separation of powers and went beyond the constitutional limits of presidential authority. This is the most powerful judicial check placed on a sitting president in over 50 years. It completely rejects Trump's belief that he holds unlimited executive power. It severely restricts what he is able to do for the rest of his term. It is going to spark a fresh wave of legal challenges and congressional investigations, and it sets precedents about the scope of presidential power that will shape American government for generations to come. Trump has been working to turn the presidency into an elected dictatorship, and the Supreme Court just said no, emphatically and with 7 justices, including 3 he appointed himself, all in agreement. That is a historic rejection, and it is landing at a moment when Trump is already surrounded by crises and scandals on every side. This ruling does not just limit Trump's power, it potentially cripples his entire presidency because everything he has been doing has been built on claiming authority he never legally had. And now the highest court in the country has told him, in the clearest possible terms, that he never had that authority and cannot claim it anymore. That is devastating. It fundamentally changes what Trump can realistically accomplish between now and either the end of his term or his potential removal from office.